It is impossible to talk about Croatian cuisine without talking about Croatian pastries. Croatians love their baked goods. Everywhere you go, you will see patisseries showing all different sorts of cakes, and each and every one of them is just delicious. I have been putting off getting into baked goods for a while, mainly because everything I make I end up eating, and if I make something super sugary, I end up eating the whole thing, and it's not exactly the healthiest thing. Also, I am not entirely confident in a lot of my baking skills, as evidenced by the first time I made this. Yeah. But you do not get better by not doing something, so we're just going to jump right on in and power through and start working our way through this cookbook, Domaći Kolači, that I got from my grandma. We're going to start today with my favorite, Kremšnita. Hey everyone, welcome back to Chef Tyler's Croatian Kitchen, and today we'll be making Kremšnita. Kremšnita is a cream slice and is a pastry that is typically associated with the former Habsburg Empire. No one really knows where Kremšnita originated from, but a lot of countries that used to be part of the Habsburg Empire now have their own. Slovenia, for example, has its own Kremšnita, mainly centered around the town of Bled. And a few weeks ago I was walking through Ljubljana with my friends and we saw a little billboard outside saying that you should come and try traditional Slovene desserts, and there's a picture of a Kremšnita on it. Which isn't technically wrong because Slovenia does have its own version of Kremšnita, but to say that it is traditionally Slovene and only Slovene is a bit of a stretch. Croatia, on the other hand, has two versions of Kremšnita. There's Samoborska Kremšnita and Zagrebačka Kremšnita. Not really quite sure why it's these two cities that have their own, because they're like 20 minutes apart from each other, so it just seems too close for it to be so different. I think like Austria would be a much better contender for having its own kind of Kremšnita that is different. But that's neither here nor there. There are these two types, and we'll be making the Zagreb version because we are in Zagreb and I just like it more. The Samoborska version, which we won't be making, has a puff pastry bottom, a custard filling, puff pastry top, and is usually served with powdered sugar. The Zagreb version, like I said, is my favorite, and it also has a puff pastry bottom followed by a custard filling, and then it has a layer of whipped cream and is topped with a chocolate glaze. Guess this makes it a bit more complex, but it does make it a whole lot better. For the puff pastry, you can either make your own or get it store-bought, and honestly, the cookbook that we're following says that you should get this store-bought. Honestly though, puff pastry isn't all that hard to make. The technique is pretty simple, it just takes a lot of time. So if you don't have a lot of time, I would recommend just buying some store-bought puff pastry. It's totally fine. But if you have the time, go ahead and make the puff pastry yourself. It's kind of a fun process, I thought, and like I said, it's not as hard as you might think it is. So for the puff pastry, what you'll need is flour, butter, and a pinch of salt and some water, and that's it. You will need the whole 250 grams of butter, and I know it sounds like a lot, but I promise you it's not. For the custard filling, we will need 4 eggs, milk, sugar, powdered sugar, vanilla sugar, some water, and some flour. The custard filling is a type of Creme Chiboust, and I'm probably saying that wrong, but it is a pastry cream with a meringue folded into it. Now this is what's going to make the filling a little bit airier, a little bit lighter, and more flavorful. For the whipped cream, all we'll need is heavy whipping cream. And for the chocolate glaze, we'll need chocolate and butter. The ingredients themselves are pretty simple, but the technique can be a little bit time intensive. So make sure you do this on like a Saturday where you don't really have anything else going on. But I promise you at the end of the day, it is worth it. Kremšnita is really my favorite. And like, it's not really known outside of the area of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. And before I forget, I'm just going to drop the chocolate. We're going to be using this springform pan to make the Kremšnita. So this is a 9 by 9 inch square or 24 by 24 centimeters. So for the puff pastry, I did make it myself, and I'm about to throw it back to a past Tyler who will show you how to make the puff pastry. But a note on that, because it is a past version of me making it, puff pastry that you make at home can last in the fridge 1 to 2 days. So if you don't have time to do everything all on one day, you can make the puff pastry the day before, leave it in the fridge overnight, and then come to the next day. So off to Past Tyler it is. Thanks, Future Tyler. Now we're going to make the puff pastry. Ingredients are pretty simple, just requires a bit of time. So first we have flour. We're going to add 250 grams into our bowl. A pinch of salt. And lastly, 150 milliliters of water. And then we'll start to mix the dough together. You could use a spoon, but since we're going to be kneading by hand, I'm just going to use my hand. No need to dirty a spoon for no reason. And once it starts to look like this, we'll just move it onto our work surface. Try to get all the extra flour out of the bowl. And then we'll just start to knead this together until it forms a nice smooth dough, about 7 minutes. And once it comes together into a smooth ball, we'll take some plastic wrap and wrap it up and let it sit for 25 minutes. I know this is a lot of plastic wrap, but we're going to use this for the turnings, and well, this is just a way to save on not making waste. Since this has to rest for 25 minutes, this is the perfect time to go ahead and grab a block of butter and let it come up to room temperature. And that way it'll make it easier to spread into the square that we'll need. So I'll see you in 25 minutes, or now. So now that the butter has softened a little bit, it's time to spread it out. I have a piece of baking paper here. I'm just going to fold it in half real quick. And we'll take our block of butter and we'll put it into the center. This is 250 grams of butter. Might seem like a lot, but I promise you, you will need all of it. Since the puff pastry is going to have layers of butter, dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, it's not really going to be too noticeable that there is so much butter in there, and I promise you, you do need it all. So what we want to do is create a square that's about 1/4 inch thick. So we'll just take our rolling pin and hit it. And eventually we'll be able to roll. So part of the reason we have this cut on the side is so that the butter will start to form into this shape. We'll just set this aside for a little bit. We'll take a bit of flour, just dust our work surface, and we have the dough. Now we're going to roll this out. It rolls pretty easily. If it starts to stick, like it kind of is there, just pull it over and add a little bit more flour. Not too much, just enough to keep it from sticking. And we want to make this into a large rectangle. So our butter block, this will be the width of the butter block, and so we want this part of the dough to be the same as the butter block. And then the length we want 1.5 times the length of the butter block. So we'll just go and roll this out. Don't worry if it's not like exactly a square, doesn't matter too much. We'll just take our butter block, remember the dimensions we had, slowly. Sometimes it likes to stick to the paper. We'll just hold the thumb down and slowly bring it back to prevent the block from breaking. Okay. Remember we want it to go this way, so we'll just place the butter right on top and remove. Now we'll take the side without the butter and we'll bring it on top. Right, now I think I did too much. It's okay, we'll just stretch it out. The sides will push together, bring this on top so that there's one layer over the butter. Looks a little uneven, but don't worry about it because we will be turning this and rolling it, and when I pick it up, it does stretch out, which means it is a little too warm, so we're going to put this into the fridge for about 20 minutes. So now that the dough is rested, it's time to start the turning process. So what we're going to do with the turning process is we're going to roll the dough out to about the same size it was before we added the butter block. Then we'll fold it into thirds, turn the dough, roll it out once more, fold into thirds, and then let rest. We're going to do that whole process, the fold, turn, 3 times for a total of 6 turns. This is what brings the layers into the puff pastry, and this is how it gets those nice tiny layers of really crispy dough in between the butter. So we'll just take our rolling pin and start to roll out the dough. If it ever starts to get sticky, that's why we have some flour here, and we'll use that to just dust a little bit on top and keep it from getting too sticky. Also, if the dough breaks, so the butter starts to come out, just add some flour onto it and that will. Don't worry so much if it's not exactly a straight line on either end. It doesn't make too much of a difference. So once we get to the proper length, we'll just fold it over. I'm going to tuck that in. And this one fold over in 2/3. Then we do the switch. Once again, we roll out. So the butter kind of broke out on this side, but I'm not going to really do anything about it because we're going to fold it over. I'll just give a slight dusting of flour on this side too to prevent the butter from coming out. And I'll pick up the book. It's called a book in French, I think. And I mean, I think it's in French. And we'll just wrap this up and we'll put this into the fridge for about 20 minutes. We'll do this process 2 more times and then I'll send it back to future Tyler, who will continue with the process. Thanks, past Tyler. So here we have the puff pastry that I made before, and I'm just going to unwrap it, and I will first actually leave it here and throw a little bit of flour onto the work surface to make sure it doesn't stick, and then place it down. Do not need this anymore. Now what we want to do is roll out the puff pastry into about the size of our springform pan. This is probably going to get bigger than that, so that's why I just don't have it here with me, but we want to roll it out to about a thickness between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. So we'll just get ahead and start doing that. So it's a little bit bigger than the springform pan, but that's not a problem. It'll probably shrink a little bit, and that's why we want it bigger. And then any extras you can just eat as like a nice little treat. It tastes amazing. So now I need our baking tray. It is not touching, as well as, wait for it, baking paper. The baking paper we will put, of course, on the baking tray. Once it's on the tray, we will take a fork and we're just going to go down over the entirety of the puff pastry and make holes into the dough. This is going to prevent the dough from rising a lot. We don't want the dough to rise. We want it to stay pretty flat, and we're going to build a Kremšnita on top. In addition to these holes, we're going to put baking weights on top of the puff pastry, and that's also going to help it stay down. I actually don't have proper pie weights, so I'm just going to use rice that I bought specifically for this purpose. Once all of the holes have been poked, I'm going to take some aluminum foil, need 2 sheets because it's kind of big, and lay it on top. And this is how we're going to basically protect the puff pastry from our, in this case, rice or bake weights. And so I make a little basin along the sides to make it easier to pull out. At this point, it's really simple. You just take rice and dump it on top. I do have 2 bags. I don't know if I need 2 bags. Maybe I'll take 2 bags. Some of this is new rice, some of this is old rice. And we'll just push it all into the corners. And all over, try to make a very even layer of rice. I also found that this does make the baking take a little bit longer, so I'm going to put this in the oven at 200 Celsius, this much Fahrenheit, for about 30 minutes, see how it is, and then I might need to take it off and let it cook on its own just to get fully cooked all the way through. So now it's time to make the cream. This is a type of Chiboust cream, so we will make first a pastry cream, and then we'll fold in a meringue. One of the things I learned from the first time I did this was that the pot I used to make the cream was way too small, so I got a bigger one this time. We'll start by taking 375 milliliters of water, which is this much in cups. That's probably the best way to do it. Then we'll add 325 milliliters of milk. We will also be taking 50 milliliters of milk and saving that for when we make the pastry cream. So like I said, this we will just leave to the side for now. This I'll go ahead and put on the stove and let it come up to a simmer. We don't really want it to boil, just up to a simmer. And then we'll use this to temper the eggs. We have 4 eggs and we will crack them into this bowl. You want to make sure that this bowl that you're cracking the eggs into is 100% clean, because this is the bowl that we'll be using to make the meringue. And since Kaylin is not here today, I won't have to be judged for a shell in there. Well, that's not why I would be judged. It would be for using my hand to get the egg yolks out of the whites. And we'll put them into this bowl over here. So it's not that big of a deal if you get some egg white into the egg yolk bowl, but it is a big deal if you get some egg yolk into the egg white bowl. In that case, the egg whites will not whip into meringue. But we don't really need this right now, so I will just leave that over there. So into this bowl, we will now add 125 grams of sugar, as well as 4 packets of vanilla sugar. Then with a whisk, we will whisk all the egg whites and sugar together until it forms a ribbon. I will be sure to show you what that looks like. It takes a minute or two of hard whisking to get it to this stage, and you can see that it forms a ribbon when you lift up some of it, and it starts to hold its shape for a little bit before melding back in with everything else. Getting a little out of breath from that. All right, anyway, now that that's done, I'll put it back onto our scale, and we don't need the sugar. Put that all the way over there. We also don't need the powdered sugar right now, but we do need is flour. So one of the nice things about making a pastry cream is that it involves flour, and that way we can bring it to a boil without having the eggs scramble. A English cream does not involve flour, and that's why you have to be careful with that one to not bring it to a boil, otherwise the eggs will scramble. So we will be adding 150 grams of flour. We'll also be adding the remaining 50 milliliters of milk that I mentioned before. And then we'll mix this all together. Just be careful, a little slow at first, while everything starts to incorporate, and then you can start whisking a little bit faster. So once this is done, we'll just take the boiling or milk and water mixture and slowly add it in little by little, and then mix that together. Since I also don't have Kaylin, I have to do this all myself. So if you have an extra person, you can have them hold the bowl while you add the milk, or they can add the milk while you whisk. Just it's easier when you have multiple people, because then you don't have to do a little bit, stop, whisk, a little bit, then stop, add some more. Really what we're doing is we're tempering the eggs. We're just gonna bring them up to temperature before we add it onto the stove. As you are going, you can add more milk in at a time. And once it's all incorporated, we'll just put it right back into the pot. Making sure you get everything out of the bowl. So I'm going to give you the view this way, and essentially you want to just keep constantly stirring the mixture while it is on the heat. Make sure you get all the way along the bottom and the sides to ensure nothing is sticking to the bottom and eventually charring. Just keep doing this until it comes together. Try not to get anything slipping out onto the stovetop. It will start to clump up at first, but don't worry, just keep going and it will smooth out. It'll start from the bottom. You'll feel it getting a little more resistance, but you gotta work through it. Again, spilling everywhere, even with the bigger pot. You can see now it's starting to thicken up. Just keep whisking, just keep whisking. It will turn into cream. See how nice and smooth this has gotten? We want to cook this down for now about 1 to 2 minutes. So there behind me I have the cream cooling off. In the meantime, we have our meringue and powdered sugar. We'll add 75 grams of powdered sugar into the egg whites. So we will then now mix this into meringue with stiff peaks. So here we have the cream, here we have the meringue. It's okay that the cream hasn't totally cooled down. We're going to take about 1/3 of the meringue. Julia Child says the first third you just kind of stir on in, so that's what I'm going to do. We're just going to stir. Generally though, when you are using meringue and you're adding it into something else, you want to fold, and that's going to be a bit more gentle, and that's going to help keep the air bubbles intact. But the first time we're just gonna stir it in. I'll add the next third, and this we are actually going to fold in. So folding technique, you just go down and up. Go down for the bottom and bring it up and turn. Down to the bottom, up and turn. And this is supposed to be a gentle motion. You don't want to pop any of the air bubbles that are in the meringue. Instead, we want to give this cream some air. So we'll just leave this aside to cool, and then we'll start on the whipped cream. So as you can see behind me, I have the rice there cooling off from the puff pastry. It's currently in the oven. The door is slightly ajar, and it's going to cool that way. While we're waiting for that to cool and the cream, we can go ahead and make the whipped cream. So I have heavy whipping cream. This is about 250 grams. I'll just put all of that into the bowl. Ooh. Yeah. So this is going to go basically the exact same way the meringue went. We will whip this until it hits stiff peaks. There we go, stiff peaks. So here we have the whipped cream, and we're going to now wait for everything to cool down before we start constructing the Kremšnita, and at the end, then we'll make the chocolate glaze. Now we're ready to start building the Kremšnita. We have the springform pan here. I'm just going to place it on the puff pastry as such. And this will tell me where to cut with our pastry cutter. So I'll just go inside and cut through the puff pastry right along the edge on all four sides. That's just about what I'll need, and we'll place it on top here. So now we have the puff pastry inside the springform mold. We have a lot of puff pastry left over. I mean, you can really just kind of eat this, like, it's quite nice. Right, now the next layer is the cream. We'll take most of it. So the cream needs to go about 2/3 of the way up the side of our springform pan. The other third is going to be taken up by the whipped cream. And we'll just spread the cream around into all of the corners. And once you get the cream about as flat as you can get it, it's time to add on the whipped cream. So once again, all of this. And again, we'll just spread this around so it gets evenly covered. And once you've got it as flat as you can make it, I'm just going to grab a paper towel, wipe off the edges, and I'm going to put this into the freezer. The reason I'm going to put it into the freezer is so that the whipped cream settles, and that way when we add the chocolate on top, we'll have a little bit of leeway in that the chocolate won't mix with the cream. So now it's time to make the chocolate glaze. I have 200 grams of baking chocolate plus 70 grams of butter. I've already gone ahead and put the butter into our pot, and I'm letting it melt. Now, quick note about chocolate and why you should not be doing it the way I'm doing it. The better way of doing this is to have or make a double boiler. That is to have a pot like so with about 1 inch of water at the bottom, brought to a boil, and a bowl on top in which you put the chocolate and the butter and you mix that way. That is a way to get a very gentle heat onto the chocolate so that it melts rather than seizes up. The reason I'm doing it this way is, one, I don't have any bowl that I can actually use on top of here. I have those plastic bowls you saw before, plus the metal bowl which has a silicone bottom, and that is such a heat sink, it won't work well for a double boiler. The other reason is I just like to live life on the edge. This isn't really too hard to do it this way. You just have to really be cognizant of the heat and making sure that the chocolate, while it gets warm and melts and gets very liquidy and pory, it doesn't seize up. So the butter here has now melted. I'm just going to take all the chocolate and we're going to put it directly into the pan or the pot. Get all those little bits too. That's flying everywhere. We'll just mix. And so since this is a game of heat, we're going to remove from the heat and actually even turn this down because we want everything, like I said, to melt and to incorporate. And I'm doing this off the heat right now just to keep the heat down and it doesn't get too hot. Just keep stirring, just keep stirring. We got this, we got this. We want this, like I said, to be spreadable. So I'm just going to put that on the heat or a little bit more, but not clumpy or not seized. Almost done, so I'm going to turn this off. And we have our chocolate glaze. Super simple. It's the moment of truth. Will this work? The chocolate is very runny. The cream is hardened a bit, not too much. Ooh, okay, and we're just gonna pour this on top. I am so nervous. Okay. Okay, we're good. We're just gonna set this now in the fridge and let it set. So we have a slight issue. It seems some of the chocolate sank under the whipped cream. I'm very upset about this. I'm not redoing this because it is not worth it at this point. But I think the biggest thing here is to learn that I need to be more patient, because that was probably what happened. I was rushing. I mean, let's open this anyway and see how it might look. I don't like the way that did what it did. Okay, the chocolate is stuck. To the side. Okay. There was an attempt. I mean, let's just cut a piece and see. How? Okay. Well, before anything else can occur, I'm just gonna scoop a lot of this back in here. The cream, not the whipped cream, the cream is doing great. The whipped cream is not. The whipped cream is kind of most of the problem. And I'm just gonna do this. I mean, I'm gonna taste it anyway, and I'm sure it will be good. I'm destroying this ish. Okay, we have a spoonful, sort of. At least it tastes good. I'm just gonna end it here because that. If you enjoyed, and hopefully you enjoyed this a lot more than I did, please hit like and subscribe. And I just feel weird saying it, but go about it, Dad.